Hey, folks and parents, I suppose you could say right now. I'm just having a thought here, an insight. I've been preparing proposals and presentations, and I love that because all sorts of dots start to connect and come together. But just a quick insight. As I'm getting ready to do a presentation for a group of parents who have never been exposed, I guess you could say, to the empowerment philosophy and the integrity model. I guess I'm kind of taken by the number of parents that I meet who yearn for, I guess you could say, two things. They have a yearning to go backwards. They have a yearning for things to be as they were before. Whether it's their children's behavior, they wish that they would behave as they did before, or they wish that the process of raising children and disciplining children were as it was before. They yearn for the good old days. Back in the day, right? When I was a kid. That's what parents always say. Back in the day when I was a kid. Why isn't it that way anymore? And parents often get frustrated because I guess you could say things have changed a bit. And I'm thinking about that. And one of the pieces that I think I used to talk about a bit more that I haven't talked about recently in my parent leadership group is the idea of parent evolution. Now, I know that we've talked about, and this is kind of runs concurrent with that idea, we talk often, though, about the idea of individuation. And individuation really is the process that human beings go through to become their own unique person. And we all want to be that. We all want to be ourselves. We all want to be accepted for who we are. And as parents, we all want our kids to grow up and become their own man or their own woman. And so you can see in some ways there's competing desires, or parents are torn. On one hand, we want our children to grow up to become their own person. On the other hand, we yearn for them to behave like they used to. We yearn for them, for times to be like they used to be. So the other concept that I was thinking about is parent evolution. That things evolve. And when I think about evolution versus revolution, because I think before we were in a paradigm of revolution, in other words, we come from a history where certain scripts and roles and expectations and traditions were so tight that oftentimes they were restrictive to a person's liberty. They were restrictive to a person's right to individuate. Now, in the free world, especially, I guess you could say we've been a bit on the cutting edge of that, but there's still a lot that's pretty restrictive. In terms of people wanting to move backwards rather than forward. And I don't in any way want to get into a use of words kind of thing here that often shows up in politics, where you've got conservative and liberal or progressive, because those words can be used to, to suggest that another position is, if you will, antiquated, is no longer useful. That is not the case. There are certainly cultural expectations and traditions and family traditions that are extremely helpful. And there's certain ideas that could be couched as liberal or progressive or conservative that are actually undermining individuation. So, when I talk about evolution, I'm not necessarily wanting to link it at all with this idea of being progressive. Um, Again, I'll say because a lot of times what can begin to show up is an immature adolescent um, idealism, a disconnect from reality. And again, there are pieces of who we are as people when we use our imagination, when we envision something new. There's some the way that gets implemented is very tricky. It has to happen with integrity. And when it doesn't, it usually ends up being some form of rebellion. So, in other words, way back when, there used to be a lot of fighting. That the, if you will, the initiatory experience had to be one of intense conflict between parent and child. That it was through that intense conflict that a parent said, you know, get out of my house, or a child said, you know, I've had enough, I'm out of here. And sometimes it could get pretty serious, pretty violent sometimes. That's what I call rebellion. So I want to set that aside and talk about evolution. And when I say evolution, I'm talking about a refining of ideas, a refining of traditions, a refining of scripts and roles and expectations, if you will. That's what growing up is all about. Growing up, or what we call individuation, is a refinement process, right? Growing up is really about letting go of immaturities, unhealthy ideas, indulgences, all those things that we would call infantile or adolescent. That's why it's a paradoxical experience of growing up. Less is more. So this evolutionary process is a refining, no different than any person would go through in the growing up or individuation process. Families grow up too. Relationships grow up too. Marriages grow up too. So do communities. And so do cultures, and so do worlds. So when we think about this, you have to think about it as an archetypal movement. It's humongous. It affects everything. There is built into the entire existence of who we are, of humanity, of our environment, of our globe, a maturing, a growing up. And part of that growing up is a refinement, an evolution. That being said, there's, as I said, there's, I guess you could say, a natural resistance to it. I guess it's been said that as human beings, we resist change. And yet change is consistent. And yet, as we compare it to some of the other systems, I like to think of it this way. You think about the earth, things on the surface, trees and plants and people and buildings, those all come and go. You go a little deeper into the earth, it's a little more stable. You go 20 feet, 100 feet, whatever down. That's not really a long ways in terms of the earth, but it gets pretty quiet down there. It gets pretty stable. It doesn't really move a heck of a lot. And the deeper you go, again, it gets pretty solid. It's that way in the human psyche as well. There are things in life that remain pretty solid and stable. And there are things that are evolving, are being refined. And so, a mature mind knows this. A mature mind seeks refinement. An immature mind, seeks to have things easy, to have things stable. I was just writing a note to my parents' leadership group tonight, talking about how there seems to be this idea that there is this perfect person out there, if you will, that there's this movement, or there's this idea that we should be moving towards this, physically, psychologically, emotionally well-balanced person, because according to, for instance, attachment theory, psychological healthy kids come from psychologically healthy parents. And yet, it just seems that all human beings have their baggage. That life isn't that way. Life isn't packaged that way. So to be a realist, you have to look at life differently. And this is what I was saying to parents. It's like, what if the purpose of life, was not to be perfectly psychologically stable, or was to, what if the purpose of life, was not to experience necessarily peace and happiness? I mean, we live in a society today of instant gratification where everybody is just pursuing this thing called happiness. I don't think it's anything new. People have been pursuing that forever. We get our moments. But what if life wasn't about that? What if like I said before, what if life was about refining us? There's a saying that we've been using a lot in the parent leadership group, which is a lot like the Serenity Prayer, I guess. It's just another way of coming at it, which basically says, when you look at your life and you're wrestling with some issues, if you will, and you've just got those issues that just seem to not go away, that you try everything and it just doesn't seem to budge. Maybe those things aren't supposed to change. Maybe it's we who are supposed to change. So what we can't change is here to change us. That's what the saying is. That we need to bump up against reality. Just as a maturing child or a maturing adolescent individuates and they make some choices about how they want to confront the world, it's important for them to have boundaries, almost like guardrails on a highway. That says, okay, you've gone too far here, you've gone too far there. This is the reality. We need stuff to bump up against, because it's in that bumping up that we become refined, that we shed our immaturities. So it seems that people aspire to have a life where there aren't these bumps, if you will. There aren't these realities. And that if these bumps and intrusions present themselves in our life, that, we're needing to be fixed. We need therapy. I don't think that's true. The more I've been doing this for 27 years, and the more I see it, the more I say to myself, what we really need is a vision. We need a different story to tell around this, because that would be a game changer. If life wasn't about smooth sailing, if it wasn't about, happiness, and I'm experiencing these trials, what's it about? Well, I think that says it right there. I'm being tried. I'm being tested. I'm being refined. I'm being prepared for something better. In the parent leadership group, we take a transpersonal approach to this stuff, which is very untraditional. And I think that's why parents love it. Numerous parents come to the group and say, wow, I've never experienced an approach like this before. I've been to so many services, and this is so completely different. It blows my mind. It's what I needed to hear. And what I mean by that, a transpersonal approach, is that we don't shy away from talking about our true self, an authentic self, a higher self. And so what then are we being refined for? What are we growing up into? It seems that from a number of different wisdom teachings, what I can gather is that we are growing up towards, I guess you could say, an encounter with our true self. I mean, it's the whole human experience. Like I've said, from the moment we're born, we are headed into a vertical direction. We want to stand on our own 2 feet. So psychologically, physiologically, we're going vertical. We want to get some altitude. So that's built into us. That's an archetypal movement of the human psyche, of a human being. What is it? Maslow talks about the epitome of humanity, of a human being, is to reach self-actualization. And that's at the very top of the triangle. And that movement to the top of the triangle, that's the true self. And so I was saying to my parent group, writing to them tonight, saying, we are the cutting edge of consciousness. We live in the free world. We have had and do have access to the greatest wisdom teachings ever. We are the cutting edge. And there's no reason for us to keep having, if you will, unrefined conversations. To be stuck in some of the old paradigms. And when I say old, I mean toxic. Whatever they might be, the toxicity embedded in scripts and traditions and roles. That's what refining is. Refining is extracting the toxicities. We need to be having elevated conversations. But I suppose in order to do that, we have to enter into a discipline that refines us. And of course, here in the age of exaggerated entitlement and indulgence, where people are encouraged to embrace themselves as special and to think about themselves first, there's a grandiosity built into that. An actual movement away from refinement, from bumping up against something. Like I said, if you start bumping up against something, it must mean something's wrong. Somebody's violating your rights, or something isn't right. Because there's arrogance and specialness and narcissism built into that. And if there's arrogance, well then, there isn't any need for me to be refined. I'm special. I'm good the way that I am. And so it gets really tricky. But all the great wisdom teachers do not say those things. All great wisdom is earmarked. The cornerstone of all great wisdom is humility. What is humility? Well, humility is when you come to the awareness that you're completely incapable of doing anything separate from your true self. That awareness is the evolution into a mature dependency. The immature form of that, of course, is when we're infantile and we are completely dependent on something greater than ourselves, that being a bigger person. I guess you could say conversely, or what have you, inversely, paradoxically, extreme maturity is the opposite. when by, I guess you could say, by earthly measures, you are standing on your own 2 feet. But even in that, you realize that you didn't get there of your own power. You didn't get there of your own resources. There's nothing that you can take credit for. See, because anything the human mind can take credit for takes away from humility. It feeds the immature need to be special, and to be validated. That's why they say oftentimes in various spiritual teaching, paradoxically, we don't have an encounter with our true self until we hit bottom, until we are stripped of everything that we think we had, until we ourselves become impotent, powerless. One could say that that's kind of the road we end up taking when we don't willfully enter into a healthy spiritual discipline. So those are my insights right now, and I've got to go hit the gym. So you all take care now, and I'll keep you posted.